we can kind of guess what's happening here. Think those male podcasters on TikTok that you see. Hound or the mole? The mole. Hi and welcome to my channel for today when you're watching this. This is another, I think the third part to the Dutch literature series that I'm doing. I'm also gonna be honest, this will be probably my last video about this because although I enjoy diving back into Dutch literature, I'm not loving it as much as I was hoping I would. So I will still be reading them, but I'll probably just mention them in like my wrap-up videos of like after 2-3 months. So yeah, let's get started very quickly. I have 4 books that I've read about Dutch literature in this year so far. So the first book that I read was this one by Jeroen Brouwers, and what it does is, for a part of the book, he describes the Japanese camps in Indonesia that he was in as like a 5-year-old kid, and how everything that he saw there and his experiences and how it had an impact on him later in life. The book itself, the other part is like him as an adult, early 40s, and at the beginning of the book he gets a call that his mother has passed away. At this point, the relationship between him and his mother is non-existent, basically. So the part about the Japanese camps is really gruesome at times, very brutally honest. I did find it interesting to read this part. I wouldn't say enjoy, but it were interesting to read, and it was good to get more of a grasp on what happened at that time because it isn't very commonly talked about. And I also believe that this was the first book that came out that really discussed about what happened in these camps. So yeah, that half part of the book, very interesting. The other part, where it's him in his 40s and he grapples with like the passing away of his mother that he doesn't really care for but does, and how he views the world now, and that part is just no. Like, think those male podcasters on TikTok that you see that are just like an array of red toxic flags, and you think like that's just take the microphone away. That's what that feels like, where you're just like, just stop talking. You're not doing anyone a service. And I think the worst part is that like he exactly knows how traumatic the experience were, how skewed and terrible of a person he is, and everything like how bad he is. And he's like, yeah, I don't care, and I'm not gonna do anything about it. Like, I get it, at that point in the 80s, we didn't talk that much about mental health, and we didn't really go to like maybe a therapist as easily as we do these days, but understanding where it all stems from, seeing how terrible of a person you are, and then still not doing anything about it. Like, we're talking 35-40 years later. So the book, I don't know, I ended up giving like 2-3 stars, 2.5-3 stars, because although there is definitely interesting parts to it, it wasn't a joy to read. That's kind of it. And I think nowadays there are probably a lot of better books that also discuss the experiences that people have in Japanese camps. Then I read Jacoba by Simone van der Vlugt. She writes novels, and generally she writes historical novels, based on historical events or people, and makes them into a novel, so romanticizes it a little bit. This one is about Jacoba van Brijs. She was like a regent of a part of the Netherlands and Belgium at that time. Or at that time it was still the Netherlands, now it's Belgium. It's a thing. But she was one of the very few female regions, and you kind of follow her story about how, as a child, and all the misfortune that she gets, and goes through the different marriages, her experience in love and in ruling, and how it is like to be a female in that position. I enjoyed reading it. Obviously, like I said, it's romanticized, so it's not like entirely true to the historical events and who she was as a person. But I do think that it's an interesting read. I do enjoy her books. You learn a little bit about history, and if you just place it next to, you can just Google in the event or the person in Google, and you kind of see the differences. It makes it very easy, and you kind of get into the feel of what it was like at the time. So yeah, I always kind of enjoy her books, and this wasn't any different. Then I came across a book of Toon Tellegen, and I got it in my library. I don't have the book right now, but he writes a lot of stories that talk about very serious subjects, but like through the eyes of animals, in a sense, like it's allegorical. So think about like the book of the Charlie, for like the boy, the fox, the horse, and the hound, or the mole, kind of in that sense, where very serious subjects are discussed, but it's through the characters are like animals. In that sense, it kind of works, and it just makes it very interesting to read. It was really nice, and really, it just gives us very simplistic view, or more easier to digest view, very serious subjects. He just really writes stories, and then adds a little bit of prose writing at the end, poetry writing. So yeah, I did really enjoy his book. I think I'm now in the second one of his. I'm still enjoying it. I don't know how to describe it any differently, but I think by taking these very heavy subjects and taking them down and breaking them apart into the very simplistic forms that it is, and then kind of giving advice through that, it's not always easy to do, and he does it really well. The last one I read was actually reread was The Engelenmaker by Stefan Brijs. I read this initially for my own Dutch class in high school, and at that point I was like, oh, this is one of my favorite books of all time, and I've said that for years, and now I finally got around to rereading it, and as much as I still enjoy it, I don't think it's my favorite anymore. But yeah, the book itself, by the way, you follow a Dr. Victor Hoppe, who, after being away for years, comes back into his hometown of Wolfheim in Belgium. And at this point, he's like this genius. He's like this doctor who works a lot with genetics and cloning. And when he comes back, he has triplets with him. And it's a very small town, so people like gossip a lot, which is very much part of like how the story of his life gets interpreted and how the story evolves also. So they're very important. Then you have the part of him and his traumatic past as a kid and his Asperger syndrome, which he very clearly has. It's not mentioned out loud, but the symptoms are much there. At first you'll very, very quickly realize that he's on the autistic spectrum, and I think later on, not in this book, but outside of it, they were like this, he's got an Asperger syndrome. Like he does not, subtlety is not his thing. Like if you say this is it, then that is it. Sarcasm doesn't really work, but that makes him part of the reasons why he does certain actions. There are a lot of other reasons. I think initially the book is just more like a psychological novel that talks about like ethics and how far you're willing to go to do what you believe in and kind of prove your point. And I think it's got a really good ending, which makes it very interesting. The whole storyline of what is up with him and his sons, triplets, and how the village ties in. It just makes for a very interesting story, I think. Alright, so basically the tagline is, sometimes what seems impossible is only really hard. And that's kind of what the sentence of one of the doctor himself says. And I think that's really showcases about how it's kind of like how far you're willing to go to prove your point or to showcase that something is possible. And how many lines are you willing to cross? Do you recognize them as lines where someone else might see it differently? So yeah, all in the form of a small town in Belgium with a doctor who has undergone and is specialized in genetics and cloning and has triplets. We can kind of guess what's happening here. That's not a huge spoiler. It is well known within the first few chapters. You understand what's going on. Still like the book. I still enjoyed reading it, but I don't think it's my favorite anymore. So I'm now on a daunting task to find a new contemporary favorite amongst books, which is also gonna be a thing, I think, this year. So yeah, if you wanna see if I find a new one from that, and just randomly, and just wanna see what other Dutch books I'm gonna read, literature work, then follow, like, and subscribe. Click the bell, be notified when I upload a new video, and yeah, it's short but sweet. And then I see you guys again next week. Until then, happy reading.